Hey, baby.
Yes?
Are we finally canceling Doug Wilson?
Over what?
His view of federal vision?
No, it's not that big of a deal. They just twist his words.
Okay, what about all the abuse allegations?
People that say that about Doug Wilson are just trying to gain access to larger platforms.
Okay, well, what about now that he's not supporting anti-Semitism?
What? Canceled! Man, Eric Hahn and Brian Sauvé are so upset at Doug Wilson. It must be because he took his fire torch to Brian Sauvé's church. Nope, that's not what it is. So, Doug Wilson kind of influenced a bunch of young men who feel fatherless and they want like a strong leader. And many of them even like moved to Moscow, if not tried to start like their own little Moscow-like communities. It's actually pronounced Moscow, I think. I say Moscow though, it's funnier. You know, Moscow 2.0, you could say, is in Ogden, Utah, with pastors Brian Sauvé and Eric Hahn. Moscafs. These guys started having their own following of young men, and they shared a lot of the same following too. They started taking some of Doug's ideas and just applying them, in addition to finding other influences online that go further than Doug Wilson goes. So there's allegations that Brian Sauvé, Eric Hahn, and then Joel Webbon in Texas are influenced by a podcast called the Stone Choir Podcast, hosted by Corey Mahler. But this situation started because, if I'm remembering correctly, is that it? Tobias Ryman Schneider, I think, used to be a pastor, the pastor of a young man who now goes to Joel Webbon's church. Time goes by, and this young man, or this man, is texting Tobias things that causes Tobias to raise his eyebrows. And he's just kind of questioning and processing. One of the things that he sends to him is a joke about the Holocaust. So he sees this really questionable meme and goes, "Excuse me?" So Tobias is like, "Let me reach out to Joel." So I don't know what the communication looks like leading up to this, but eventually this results in a Zoom call.
They had a meeting, Pastor Joel and Pastor Tobias and a couple of this parishioner's friends and another elder of Pastor Tobias had a Zoom call meeting to discuss it, and it was recorded without Pastor Tobias's knowledge.
Okay.
Pastor Joel did a podcast with someone talking about what happens when one of your members shares a Holocaust meme.
Their concerns. We spent the last hour telling it, well, here's our view on this, here's our view on that. Well, since that meeting, it didn't. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought, but since that meeting, Tobias has gone on several different people's podcasts, some of them well known, and continuing to talk about the situation. Because honestly, I don't think Tobias will be satisfied unless this member of my church is excommunicated. He wants this member of my church, him and his wife, who agrees with her husband, and their children, to be kicked out of our church.
Right.
And I just want to say publicly right now, just in case it wasn't clear, not going to happen. Not going to happen. You cannot say, "Dance, monkey," excommunicate. I'm sorry, I won't do that. And this is why the young men will continue to come to me, and no one will remember your name.
That's why no one will remember your name.
No one will remember your name. Look at him. He's just trying to make a name for himself. And maybe you knew that was from a movie, maybe you didn't. But the autistic guys know.
So Tobias comes out with his response, his first episode of his new show for a ministry called Eschatology Matters, saying, "I never called for the excommunication of this man and his entire family. We simply wanted to have a discussion with you about the views that seem to be coming from your ministry and influence of the people in your church."
And then a couple days later, Pastor Joel let Eschatology Matters let them know that he had recorded the initial meeting that Pastor Tobias was talking about in his podcast.
Yeah.
And said that there are discrepancies here. Gave the initial secret recording to Eschatology Matters. They listened to it, took down Pastor Tobias's podcast because of it. Mm-hmm. But Pastor Joel did not allow Pastor Tobias to hear the recording.
Mostly silence from the other side, Tobias, Doug Wilson, and James White's side, until this statement has come out called the Antioch Declaration, I think. This goes back a few months. I remember there was like a couple of like playful things with White Boy Summer or whatever, and Doug Wilson was like, hey, you're taking it too far, like Nazism is not the way to go. So it's the same kind of conversation where basically you have these older men who influence these younger men. These younger men have created their own kind of following, and these young men getting extremely offended and feeling like Doug Wilson has abandoned them. You can kind of even see where they're coming from, because they're like, we're just applying your teaching, we think, and now you're like publicly shaming us. But what's been especially shocking is to see Doug Wilson, who for years has been the target of a lot of criticism from confessionally reformed types. And over the years, we've been critical of his federal vision. We've been critical of the abuse allegations. And those young men came to bat for Doug Wilson all this time. But now, because he's not wanting to go in a certain direction that they're going in, they're basically canceling him. You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Or in Doug's case, you either die a villain, or see yourself live long enough to become a hero. Which I would still say, mark and avoid Doug Wilson because of his theology. It is really interesting to see them defend that, but then these things is at least questionable. I'm just going to summarize the conversation. Like, person A will be Brian Sauvé and Eric Kahn types. Person B, for boomer, will be Doug Wilson and James White types, because that's what they're calling them, just boomers. Just for simplicity, like, let's say that side A seems to be engaging in an entire system we'll call the post-war consensus system, but only picking a point out of that system and hiding behind that, saying that that's all they're really doing. Where side B is more concerned with the post-war consensus system's conclusions, anti-Semitic conclusions. So the post-war consensus, I'm going to botch it, but the conversations the last few years have been, there was a consensus after the war that was essentially written by the bad guys. The post-war consensus is Jews are the heroes, Nazis are the bad guys. And that required us to say Churchill is the hero. That consensus is being questioned. How good of a guy was Churchill? I mean, generally it's just engaging with history. And as far as that goes, that is a legitimate conversation. But what's not legitimate is anti-Semitism. So side A is saying, no, all we're doing is just having conversations about the post-war consensus. And not all of us are, but some of us in the church are. And that's all it is we're just having conversations. But side B is more concerned about the conclusion of anti-Semitism. And what's not being identified, in my opinion, is that the post-war consensus doesn't require anti-Semitic genocide. But anti-Semitic genocide requires the post-war consensus. So side A can say, no, this is all we're doing, but side B is not concerned about primarily just the questioning or the wondering, but they're concerned about the conclusions. So Joel Webbon is coming to the defense of this man and saying, no, you've slandered me, because this young man had some legitimate questions, but he repented of where he was taking it. The fact that it sounds like they're like, we need more proof. What has really surprised me is just how many people online have come to the aid of Joel Webbon and have canceled Doug Wilson because they see Joel Webbon as taking a stand for white young men that most pastors have not done. You're not going to cancel my church member. You're not going to force me to excommunicate him. Hence the Antioch statement. They basically are asking for signers. They're drawing ecclesiastical lines, basically. And they're trying to address what seems to be like anti-Semitism rise. What's very frustrating about this is that these personalities have associated with one another on the cloud, because I got my platform, you have your platform, and our followers. It's just like this amorphous blob of leader and follower online. And nobody's ever been held accountable. There's no strict associational lines. There's no denomination. It's just a bunch of personalities who have influencers who have followers, and their followers kind of like follow each other, like follow each influencer, and it's kind of just morphed into this thing. And now, because of this issue, Side B wants to make an ecclesiastical associational move with this statement. They want to play by the rules of, well, here's this doctrinal statement that's going to draw associational lines. Like, these people haven't played by those rules up to this point. Like, Doug Wilson signs the Federal Vision statement, promotes Federal Vision theology, says don't label me Federal Vision, but continues to teach the concepts of Federal Vision. So they've played fast and loose with doctrinal statements, associational definitions, denominational lines up until this point, and now they want to hold these men accountable. And so you can kind of see why from the Side A's side, like, whoa. So, and that's why there's the charge of, well, now you're just like using your age and talking down to us because we're young men. And that's why there's the charge of, feeling like abandoned by your fathers.
So until the future Athanasius and Augustine come, then you've got to deal with blue collar, slightly stupid Joel Webbon. Because when you look at the lay of the land and evangelicals as a whole, I'm nothing to brag about, but I'm one of the best we got.
Let's say Joel has arrogance about him, right? And you really want people to know that. Here's the way not to do it. To make, number one, a federal case out of a meme statement. Number two, to put out a video full of lies.
These conversations are supposed to take place ecclesiastically, and these matters are supposed to be adjudicated within the context of institutions that have moderators and accountability. As Neil Postman kind of points out, the medium that we use to communicate the message actually changes the message itself. And so we're speaking an ecclesiastical message in a non-ecclesiastical way. We're drawing associational lines regarding interpretation of doctrine, philosophy, and history. Yeah, we're just picking and choosing when we want to draw those lines. It's convenient for us when the movement's got a lot of steam to not care about those things. But when these issues come up, then we want to start to hold each other accountable. In cases of difficulties or differences, either in point of doctrine or administration, wherein either the churches in general are concerned, or any one church in their peace, union, and edification, or any member or members of any church are injured, that's with reference to excommunication, in or by any proceedings in censures not agreeable to truth and order, it is according to the mind of Christ that many churches holding communion together do by their messengers meet to consider and give their advice in or about that matter in difference. There are a lot of people that are like, well, should I sign this statement? And the issue is that this matter has become your information, but that doesn't mean that it's your business. And it's strange for them to put out this statement. And the question is, who ought to sign the statement? Ought everyone? I'm not sure. Is it CREC churches? Well, I guess not, because I think James White's one of the signers. So it's not clear. It's a strange message. I think part of the problem is that we confusedly are blending our cloud-based associations with ecclesiastical interchurch relations and associations. And sometimes we are doing one thing while thinking that we're doing another. And I think this statement thrown out there in the cloud is pretending like it's able to do more than it actually can. Because the cloud exists in one way, but in another way, it doesn't exist. And so Christians forget this, and they pretend like the cloud's able to do more than it actually does, other than just be fun. But then when we start drawing associational lines in the cloud, it makes us anxious, because there's the controversy, but then there's the pressure that I must make a decision about it, even though it's not my business, even though I'm not actually directly involved. Now I have the pressure of, well, where do I stand? Our knee-jerk reaction needs to be comfortable with boundaries, comfortable with saying, this actually isn't my business. We need to be more comfortable saying, I'm not sure. But just know that when we make judgments, it doesn't hold any adjudicating power in the real world. I would actually rather compare it to the Alistair Begg situation, because that is the controversy, but then how I'm supposed to feel about it. But that debate was over, he made a decision, do I agree with his decision, right? Like, I could look at the Alistair Begg situation and say, oh, he said what? I disagree with him. But in this situation, I'm not sure. You know, like, the thing is, we aren't comfortable being able to step back and say, this is a very complicated, messy situation. We need to be more comfortable saying that. Like, the cloud has made this very messy. And without the cloud, these things are very messy. That's why churches have said that we need to come together and adjudicate these matters in long, boring meetings, not in 140 characters. Anti-Semitism is wicked. The post-war consensus is a good thing. But the situation, it looks ridiculous. The fact that the cloud is affecting our faith in these ways is scary, because it seems like the cloud is threatening to so muddle the faith that we lose these old distinctions like the one I just read. But the reality is, the cloud actually can't do anything to the faith, because Christ is Lord over the church. He shed his blood and perfectly obeyed the law and earned the blessings of the Spirit of the age to come, and he sends it out to his people, draws them to himself to worship him. And the cloud can't do anything about that. It'll get confusing, it'll get blurry, it'll get messy, but we can take heart because Christ is Lord over the church.